BWI Daily Edition with you here today. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. Nate Bauer back with me. We are after practice for Penn State football, and we're taking a look at the Penn State receiver position because we got to talk to Taylor Stubblefield tonight and got his thoughts on his position group. Nate, what were your initial impressions about what was going on at practice for what you saw, and then from the receiver position, what you heard from Taylor Stubblefield?
Yeah, again, like we're catching the beginning of practice, so it's not like we're seeing live reps of receivers against defensive backs. But I thought that there were a few very interesting things to me. One being the dynamic between Mike Yurcich and his quarterbacks, right? You and I talked about this after the fact, but he was openly booing when there were poor passes thrown from his quarterbacks to the receivers, which included the tight ends and the running backs.
Gotta love that.
It was fairly humorous. It's not. I'm not trying to make more of it than what it was. It was mostly just funny. But there's very clearly this kind of freewheeling atmosphere that he has established with those guys, which is interesting.
Intense but fun, right? He does seem to be a very animated individual that loves to mix it up.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. Right. I mean, it's supposed to get your competitive juices going, right? There are a lot worse people who can be booing you than Mike Yurcich.
Yeah, it's probably his point too, right? You're going to have a lot more than one in the future.
Yeah, I have a feeling that Sean Clifford knows that feeling. So
yeah,
so that was kind of curious. And then I mean, I was actually spending time with the receivers, not intentionally, based on Taylor Stubblefield being available to the media tonight. But I had an opportunity to see some of those guys in action, and I thought there were a few who, dare I say, stood out a little bit. One being Harrison Wallace, the true freshman.
Yep.
He was a guy who just caught my eye. I'll be curious to hear what your impressions are, but I think that his size is what stood out to me. He just looks bigger. Some guys 6'2", 190 is what he's listed at. They look skinny.
Yeah.
Right. When you're that tall, you look skinny. I didn't think he looked skinny. I thought he looked the part. So, he was one of the guys, Parker Washington, obviously Jahan, Dotson, those guys, you kind of know what you have, but KeAndre Lambert Smith, right?
Right.
Getting a peek at him. It was interesting what Taylor Stubblefield said, and we can get to that obviously in a couple of minutes, but it kind of aligns with some of the things that you see from KeAndre Lambert Smith in terms of a drop here at practice, right? We've seen that a couple of times now in the few practices that we've had where he's dropped a pass, and Taylor Stubblefield's message tonight was shake it off, right? Like you got to be able to shake it off, and that's one of the big things that they've been working on with him is to not let it drag him down. So they're well on their way, and as you can see where the calendar is, game's coming.
Yeah. So it was interesting. We were in a similar situation of kind of over on that side of practice, watching the receivers for a little bit. Parker Washington, I mean, I've had a crush on his game since his senior tape, and he continues to look the part. And he talked to us today about being that guy, and I find that conversation about Parker Washington, because one of the things that Taylor Stubblefield talked about is him being a leader, not just being one of the best receivers on the team, but being a leader. And from what I gathered listening to Taylor Stubblefield talk about his receiving group is that they need a leader and they need somebody to step up. From a play standpoint, the words he used and the things he said about his receivers, to me, kind of put off an alarm bell in my head that there's nobody really outside the guys that we are aware of that has really taken a step forward. And we'll go through a couple of the guys that he talked about here, because he did give kind of his impression on most of the depth chart. So you mentioned Harrison Wallace. We'll start there with the young guys as far as what Harrison Wallace is, and if you've seen any of my scouting reports, physically talented guy, as you pointed out, and it sounds like he's gotten bigger since high school. He wasn't particularly physically dominant in high school. He was just a super athlete. That's kind of what we get from Taylor Stubblefield here.
Liam and Harrison, you know what? They're getting a ton of reps. They're getting better. Harrison is a player who is extremely athletic. You could tell by his his highlight film and what he did on the basketball court. So it's just about really trying to fine tune his skill development as a wide receiver. So we're really trying to work on that, along with a lot of plays that you got to learn. It's like a foreign language, and you got to try to pick it up fairly quickly. Liam, he's a very focused young man who works his tail off. And so both of them are having a really good camp.
To me, hearing that about those two young guys, if you were wondering, are any of them going to have a chance to contribute this year? No. Harrison Wallace, the physical side, the talent is all there. That's why he was a part of that class. He was one they were very excited about late as far as the ad, but has to learn how to play receiver, which was a part of his scouting profile of a guy that was not asked to do a lot in high school, and needs to learn the playbook. So, if you're looking down the list of, so those young guys are not going to contribute. We've heard Clifford doing good things so far, hard worker, but nothing really tangible about what he's been able to do so far in practice. And by the way, I don't think there's anyone that we've asked. We've heard more about Liam Clifford. There have been more questions about Liam Clifford than anybody else. And at this point, nobody has really said anything. Nobody's really mentioned him as far as a guy that has stepped up at this point. So if you're crossing off your list, and like we were doing with the depth chart earlier this week, I'm immediately taking those guys out of consideration to be a part of any part of the two deep, at least for the first month of the season.
I think that's a fair way to put it, probably. However, I'm also looking at this, and I think that you probably are as well, as, all right, you got Jahan Dotson, and you got Parker Washington, but even knowing that those two guys need to learn how to play the position and learn the playbook, are you sure that they're worse than the third option that's out there?
Well, that's the question I wanted to ask tonight, that I didn't get necessarily. That wasn't the question I asked, but what's the absolute must that you have to play? So what is the skill, or what is the mental part of the game, the absolute must to step on the football field? Because that's going to determine whether or not those guys see significant roles, because it wasn't just those guys. That's just where we're starting. But some of the other comments of some of the other young receivers, and not even young receivers, just other receivers on this roster, were less than stellar. And I want to cut to the chase, because what he said about Daniel George, to me, was eye-opening, and this is where really what I want to talk about tonight.
The thing with DG is just always about the little things. He is extremely talented. He's a big body dude who's fast. He's physical. He's one of the strongest dudes on the team. And you know what? We've challenged him just to take care of the little things in all aspects of his game, all aspects of his life, is to take care of the little things, because the little things lead to big things in a positive way. And so, this summer, he's done some of those things. He's been challenged, and so the start of camp, he's done some really good things to start of camp, more so than he did.
So the little things, take care of the little things, attention to detail. These are all things that you would desperately hope that I think is he a redshirt junior at this point? He's got to be a redshirt junior at this point.
He is.
That's alarming. That is really alarming, and that's kind of what we were talking about with Parker Washington, who is a true sophomore, was thrust into a situation last year that he had to be one of the guys, and now we're having this conversation about somebody taking a look at the little things and all the, that to me is alarming, that you don't have any depth now. Like you're still waiting on Daniel George and some of these other guys in the middle of that roster to really do something. And if that's the case, how do your leaders lead? How does a Parker Washington, who's a sophomore, how does he say something? How does he lead at that position to elevate everyone around him if there are guys who have been in the program twice as long as him, that you're getting those comments out of your receiver coach? And I know he did say he's done good things, and he said he's turning the corner on that stuff, but that's not great. If I'm hearing those things, that's not great. I'm not encouraged by hearing that. Am I overreacting to that?
I don't know if it's overreacting. I think that everybody, I'm stealing from James Franklin here, but everybody's on a different journey, right? In terms of development, you have these guys moving at different rates during their career, right? The first thing that James Franklin said about Parker Washington was his maturity.
Right.
Was just his mature approach to the game. The only thing that I'll bring up, and I'll let you expound on this, and I'm going to mess up the reference, but Justin Fields' pass in the college football playoff semifinal in 2019, where his receiver broke off one way and he threw it into right at the end of the game. He threw it into the end zone, interception, ball game, right?
Right.
That was a read, right? Like,
right.
And so if you're, it only takes that one opportunity. It only takes that one time. And obviously we're talking about the highest stakes, but I'm just saying, if your receivers are not dialed in and do not know where they need to be at which times, it can be disastrous. It can create situations where you are turning the football over. And Penn State, dare I say it, is shell-shocked over what happened last year. I don't think that there's any question about that. That they have an irrational fear almost, and for good reason, of turning the ball over. And so if when you look at Parker Washington, it's really important that he makes plays and differentiates himself, right? All of those things about the physical side of being a receiver. But the second part of it is, do not hurt us.
Right.
Do not be a detriment, because it doesn't matter how spectacular 1 out of every 5 catches you make is. It's, are you going to put us in a position that is going to hurt the team? And so I think that when you look at after Jahan Dotson and after Parker Washington, the question is maybe less so who is going to make a big play versus who is the least bit of a liability. I mean, like, I don't want that to sound salacious. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want that to sound like a huge slam on everyone else. I just think it's a question of that is who can you feel confident putting out there that, yes, they're going to show consistency in catching the football, but also is not going to make that huge mistake that, and not the huge mistake that is so obvious that everyone picks up on it, but the one that when they go back and they watch the film, and Sean Clifford's the one who's walking away with the interception on the stat sheet, but internally they're saying, nope, that's on my guy over here. That's on this receiver for being in the wrong spot at the wrong time.
Yep. And I'm so glad this is the conversation we were having earlier in this week when we were talking about what's the best possible scenario at certain positions. And you bring up consistency, and the upside and the potential is kind of what I was leaning on as a best case scenario. But you're right, when it comes to what's the best realistic scenario here is that you have guys that are reliable and they catch the football. And your guy, Cam Sullivan-Brown, got the lauded consistency remark from Taylor Stubblefield after practice. Here's what he had to say about Cam Sullivan-Brown.
What he does is he provides some consistency, probably that you guys don't see, or it doesn't necessarily show up in the stat line. But he's a consistent player. He's a player that when he's out there and he's working, he'll work hard. He'll do what he's supposed to do. He's not necessarily a vocal leader, and so right now I'm challenging him as well, somebody who's a old vet who's been around, and he's been around and he's done things the right way. So Um, like I said, I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. I do believe that he's going to have some very big plays this season. Whether it's going to be moving the chains on the third down or getting in that end zone. So I like CSB. I really do like him, and I'm excited to see what he's going to do as well.
So you got your consistent guy, right? That's exactly what you just said, is a consistent chain mover, a guy that's going to make reliable plays for us, and he's going to get the opportunity to do it. I'm just concerned about the depth at this position because, that's why I started where we did, when you've got the young guys and you've got Daniel George, and you're hearing those comments that they're probably not ready to make significant contributions. And then you got Cam Sullivan-Brown. What happens if he gets hurt again? Or, we haven't even talked about Jahan Dotson because he's just such a given. What happens if any of these guys get hurt?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's instructive to come at this conversation keeping in mind what the conversation was last preseason. Because last preseason, if you recall, the conversation was that Jahan Dotson might be a serviceable number 2 or number 3 receiver.
Right.
And they were looking for a number 1.
Right.
With him having that opportunity to be a number 1, but Parker Washington didn't know anything about Parker Washington, didn't know anything about KeAndre Lambert Smith, that those guys were going to be ready to play and produce the way that they did. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think that it's an accident that the conversation and the interview that I did with Taylor Stubblefield in the preseason media day, the word that he used was opportunity. And it's an opportunity because yes, it's a necessity that they get a couple other receivers to step up and fulfill those roles. But it's an opportunity because no one has done it yet.
Yeah.
It's right. That's what the opportunity is. The opportunity is, hey, there is no one who is in front of you on the depth. When we're talking about that third spot, there's no one on the depth chart who you would say today they're a shoo-in, right?
Right.
I mean, and I think obviously based on Stubblefield's comments tonight, you're going to look at KeAndre Lambert Smith and Cam Sullivan-Brown as being those two guys who have the best opportunity, the best shot to fulfill that role. But beyond that, it's a big question, but one that I think that generally speaking, there's some optimism about. That you have the talent. It's just about molding that talent into becoming the type of player that you want them to be. It's just, can you do that on the timeline that is necessary? Is right? Like, do you have? Are you able to accelerate it to the point where those guys can be more than just serviceable and not liabilities in that role right now from the start of the season? I don't know the answer to that, but I think that's what they're working on right now.
I'm Thomas Frank Carr. He's Nate Bauer. This is the BWI Daily Edition. We're coming to you post-practice talking about the receiver position and what Taylor Stubblefield said about his position group after practice in the second full week of training camp. If you have not yet, check out our season preview magazine and, of course, the latest edition, which I have right here, Nate, of the Blue White Illustrated magazine. We were out about town today delivering a couple of these across town, so if you want to pick up your Blue White Illustrated magazine, you can do that anywhere in town, and I might just keep it up because that looks better for the lighting. Also, you can check out 1-800-421-7751 or bluewhiteonline.com, and of course bwi.rivals.com. I can't believe I messed that up. /subscribe. You mentioned KeAndre Lambert Smith. Doing three things at once. You mentioned KeAndre Lambert Smith. This is the part where I may have been a little doom and gloomy to start this, but the good news, Penn State football fans, is that it seems that the light has come on for KeAndre Lambert Smith.
KeAndre Lambert is, he's been working hard, and he's been working hard not just on his physical abilities, but also his mental toughness. And so he has grown in terms of if something negative happens, to be able to shut the door on that negative event and let's move on. Like in golf, I'm sure a lot of you guys know in golf, you make that one bad shot and it's like it leads to the next one and the next one and the next one. So just trying to encourage him to shut the door on maybe a bad play and move forward. So he's had some moments this fall camp where he's done a tremendous job of, I guess, having that light come on that say, you know what? Okay, I might not have executed the way I need to execute. I'm not going to let that get me down. And you know what? Let's get this next play. So he would be one that I think is moving in that direction.
So that's good, at least, right? That KeAndre Lambert-Smith, obviously a very talented person when it comes to being a receiver and catching the football, was really the problem of the consistency there. Coming back to your favorite word, if he does become more consistent, that does paint a vastly different picture for Penn State, where now you have at least 4 guys. I'm now counting up to 4. And that's better than where we were a couple weeks ago, if that's the trajectory for KeAndre Lambert-Smith. But maybe it's just me, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. It's just that after 4, I was a little more surprised, and hopefully this isn't taken. Hopefully I'm not taking this the wrong way, and that he wasn't being, honest, and then it's just a snapshot of that stuff. But it does not seem like outside of those 4, there's really anybody who is doing what you just said, taking advantage of that opportunity. Do you think that as training camp goes on, that picture might change?
I'm a little conflicted because I don't think that it necessarily needs to, in the sense that if you go back and look, right? Well, first of all, you got to understand what the tight end situation is at Penn State. They love it. They're gonna have catches. They're gonna have receptions. At least one will have a 24 receptions, right?
Sure. Yeah.
All I'm saying is that my only point is, if you look historically at Penn State's distribution of receptions, it's usually 2. It's usually 2 that end up in the 20s, right? Like 20 and above.
Right.
Obviously, you got a couple of years where you have a couple guys in the 40s, and occasionally guys in the 50s, but typically speaking, you've got a pretty severe drop off after the top 2, because again, like I'm saying, you're looking at two receivers who stand out, a tight end, at least one tight end who stands out, and at least one running back who ends up in the 20s in terms of his reception. So do you necessarily have to have a third solidified receiver who is finishing in the 30s and 40s over a 13-game season? Probably not. But you want to, but historically, the years recently where Penn State has had the most success, 2017 being among them, 2016, there was that third. Right. Brandon Polk, DeAndre Tompkins, guys who were not the top, right? Not the Chris Godwin, but
the Saeed Blacknall, the guy who was a valuable key situation sort of receiver. I guess that's right. And a lot of those guys, what they had was they could win on the boundary. And that is one area that I do think that is a concern, that you're right. There are options and there are places outside of wide receiver that you can go. But in 2019, Penn State did struggle with consistency when KJ Hamler was their lead receiver, and he operated from the slot. And Pat Frymuth was their option. He operated from the slot and in line. It's those bodies on the outside, and Jahan Dotson is one, but that balance is really what I guess what I'm looking at today. Of there doesn't seem to be anyone coming out of the weeds to be a consistent contributor or to push any of these guys to be better. And that's where I think it's interesting, the conversation of a guy who's a true sophomore who is clearly a talent and a bright star of a player and of a person. Because Parker Washington, I've enjoyed talking to him thoroughly every time. He's a very charismatic, energetic, positive guy, but does that translate into holding other guys accountable and raising the group as a whole? And is he going to be able to do that with Jahan Dotson as your top two leaders at a position? That is an interesting dynamic that I don't know the answer to, and that I think is a really interesting dynamic in this conversation of how quickly can they get those other guys to get to their level or to get to the best version of themselves in order to raise, the profile of the offense. Because I do wonder about that boundary position.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I tread lightly in terms of the influence of others in the room when you have to do it.
Right.
Right? Like bottom line is, it doesn't matter who necessarily is the right. Like Jahan Dotson is going to set his own standard, and
Right.
you're going to see that, and that influence is going to be there every single day. Parker Washington the same. However, it is ultimately going to be up to these individual players themselves to assert themselves and provide that option or not for Penn State's passing game. But I can tell you that Mike Yurcich wants it, Sean Clifford wants it, James Franklin wants it. All of these guys, right? Like you've got
Right.
there's so much in football, obviously, that's reliant upon one another. But that's a big one, is to have that element, and you've talked about this in terms of Mike Yurcich's offense. Stretching the field is a big deal,
right,
for this guy. So that is a huge piece of the puzzle that Penn State either has and feels confident with Jahan Dotson. I don't know if that's how I would describe him, right, as a player, as right, like he went 80 last year a few times, but not in non-busted coverage kind of ways.
Right. It wasn't necessarily it was him versus a guy on the outside and he went deep and got the ball. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, that's not, there isn't a guy who you see as the real game-breaking threat from a speed and size on the outside perspective. But it is interesting. I'll say this, though. You have pulled my finger off the panic button a little bit, and I think that was an important thing to do here tonight as far as looking at this position. So this is the thing. If you're when I'm scouting players or when I'm writing my notes on high school prospects, and if I'm talking about whether it's Jaden Dotton we didn't get to tonight, but like getting the motor to come on, or attention to the details, or learning the position, that means these guys aren't going to play well. They're going to be, it's physical talent, sure, that's all there, but we always talk about upside, and you have to realize the other half of it. And I would be putting too much on those true freshman receivers to expect anything out of them, but maybe in the back of your mind, you were hoping for a miracle if you're a Penn State fan in that situation, and it's just the reality of that isn't going to happen.
I mean, I do think that there's also a question of how much attention is Jahan Dotson going to command,
right?
Because there obviously, again, like for the game itself, defensive coordinators are picking their poison in some instances, and so they're going to feel comfortable leaving a corner on an island against a receiver who hasn't proven himself, as opposed to Jahan Dotson, who you're assuming will have help, right, on the back end. And so, does that set of conditions create a different opportunity for one of these unproven receivers that wouldn't exist otherwise? And in that circumstance, James Franklin talks about it all the time. The game is about finding one-on-ones and then winning them, isolating one-on-ones, getting yourself into that matchup, and then winning that matchup. I can tell you what, Cam Sullivan-Brown, KeAndre Lambert-Smith, one of those guys is going to have that opportunity this season.
Yep. That's a perfect way to put it.
Do it.
And that's I think that's a perfect note for us to end on. That was so well said. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. Nate Bauer just hitting a home run in the bottom of the ninth to take us out here on the Blue White Daily Edition. Thanks for coming on today, Nate.
Thanks so much. You are making me blush, but also I'm sunburned. So
Well, the technical stuff was defeating me today, so you can't even see what color my skin is because it looks like I'm coming out of the. It looks like I'm emanating the light today.
you're from an episode of Chernobyl.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We'll be back again tomorrow here on the BWI Daily Edition with Greg Pickle as we give you more from Penn State's Training Camp 2021. We'll talk to you then.
Hit like.
Yes, do that!